Accurascale have given an attention to detail that makes this the Rolls-Royce of O-gauge wagons. Hi there everyone, welcome back to another video here with me, Jenny Kirk. It's really great to see you. I hope I find you well. And today we've got a review of an O-gauge product for a change, and this comes from Accurascale. I've been really looking forward to seeing this, and you might recognise this as the scaled up version of one that we did in O. So without further ado, let me just mention our sponsor, Trainzomatic, producers of DCC decoders designed by enthusiasts for enthusiasts, and we've got a link to them down below if you're interested in going and checking them out. Compatible with all brands of locomotives. They fit and work first time, every time. But without further ado, come with me and I'm going to show you today's goodies. So here it is, the Accurascale O-gauge version of the HUO 24.5 ton hopper wagon. Now, I was really impressed last year with the O gauge versions, and Accurascale were kind enough to send over the BR Grey and the NCB versions. Now, they've sent over here the O-gauge version of one of the BR liveries. I'm going to just slide this out. In fact, one thing I'm going to do is show you the catalogue number on there. And we've got British Railways HOP 24/HUO 24.5 ton hopper wagon, and this is wagon version G, and all that is that they've done several different versions with different running numbers and slightly different livery bits and pieces, so that you can very quickly build up a rake of these wagons, and they really do look something special. So I've also got the catalogue number there as well, and they're basically on the end. You've got a different letter denoting which version of the HUO that this is. In the package as well, we got this with the O version, but it's really nice to see it again with the O-gauge too. We've got the full history of the wagon, and it goes into depth, tells you how many were made, where they were made, and the entire lifespan of the wagons, and they were actually reasonably long-lasting. It's also the case that we get this picture of some really nicely weathered examples, and you may remember that we did a weathering video on the O versions, and I'm looking at this and actually hoping that Accurascale might let me have a go at weathering these as well. I think with the bigger wagon in the senior scale, it really will look something special with a bit of weathering, but we'll see what they say. On the back of that as well, we've just got some general information about the model itself, and what I like up here is we get the full exploded diagram of all of the different parts that go into these. They're not a simplistic injection moulded item. They're very much almost like a factory assembled kit. You know, you could imagine paying a lot of money for a kit of this wagon and build it up, and then still have to paint it and finish it, get all the lettering on it. But that is exactly what Accurascale have done for you, and you know, I think it's great in this day and age where a lot of people moan an awful lot about prices of things. This shows just how much goes into one of these, so actually it's pretty good value for money. You try and buy yourself a kit, assemble it, paint it, finish it, all for the price that these come in at. And I tell you now, you're not going to be able to. The O-gauge version comes in a packaging inside the box. It's pretty much like a scaled up version of what the O gauge ones came in. So I'm just going to pull this apart. And actually, I quite like these because they do hold the wagon reasonably snugly, but it does let you get them in and out without risking any kind of rubbing or damage. So already we can see it's the big brother of those 00 ones that we did before. And actually, the first thing you can really feel when you pick it up is the weight that's in this. Now, it's got an awful lot of really quite fine chassis detail. So I am curious where they've hidden the weight, because you can feel that there must be some kind of weight in here. But it's actually really well hidden wherever it is, because there's no protrusions or anything on this wagon. In fact, from every single angle, what you see on this wagon is very finely detailed. So even upside down here, you can see all of this really nice bits and pieces here as part of the hopper discharge mechanism. And it really is quite exquisite, especially when you consider that unless for whatever reason you're going to have this wagon upside down on your layout, you're not really going to see much of this detail, but it's there. And well, I'm pretty much blown away, it has to be said. Everything about this just looks perfect. You know, the chassis on the 00 version and all of these side gussets and ribs really actually blew me away. I thought they were incredibly well done in the 00 wagon. And actually now when it's scaled up to O gauge, you can really see so much more of that detail in there. It is just incredible. It may sound like I'm gushing an awful lot over this wagon, but actually there's a lot to gush over. It really is nice. The 00 version really impressed me with these handrails, because they were quite resilient, the material that they were made from, and yet they were really, really fine. And it was one of the features of that wagon which I thought stood out. And on the O gauge version, again, they are very resilient but pretty slender. I'm not sure, are these metal or plastic? It's, I guess, kind of hard to tell. I think it's a springy plastic, but it's actually quite strong. So it's going to withstand quite a few knocks. The buffers are sprung, and again, just like the 00 version, they've got the correct pattern of buffers there in the shanks. We've also got these little footboard step things as well. And just like in the 00 version, these are actually scale thickness, but still pretty resilient. I mean, this is a loaner from Accurascale, and I'm just really trying to see. Yeah, it's really strong. I don't want to push it too far in case I break it, because I think it's a case of if you break it, you pay for it. But everything is here. It is just really exquisite detail. The actual sole bars of the wagon as well, we've got all of this, so like bolts or rivets, I think they are. They're all in the right places, and they just look perfect. The finish on the wagon as well, we've got tempo printed all of this detail, and actually in O gauge, everything's just that little bit bigger, obviously, so it's just nice to see some of the stuff that perhaps on the 00 wagon you couldn't quite see. You can now see all of that detail. So we've got some of the plates on here. The actual lettering, though, is very faint. It's kind of like white on grey. It looks a bit odd, but I'm guessing that it is totally prototypical. Now, one of the other things I've spotted here on this wagon, which is really nice, is it appears to be fully independently sprung. Now, the actual springs there are a solid detail moulding piece, but underneath, quite unobtrusive, there's kind of like a coil spring down to the axle box. So when I push the axle up and down, it repulses back. It's not a feature that is immediately obvious, but that independent four-wheel sprung suspension will mean that this wagon will follow the track really, really smoothly. It means that it will run a lot more reliably, it will have less risk of derailment, and I actually really like that. When it runs on the track, it just feels so much smoother for such actually quite a simple innovation here, but I really do like that. The rest of the wagon, well, it all comes up to the same standard, if not better, than we saw on the 00 version. All this brake rigging is really quite nicely done. It appears to be moulded from quite a strong plastic, and the brake lever, let's just see, is that actually poseable on this model? My word, yes, it is completely poseable. So You can see there, you can pose it with the brakes on and with the brakes off. So it's quite interesting. I've never really seen that on a model before. And I guess with O gauge, it does allow for potentially these kind of detail additions. But really, that is quite impressive. The actual shape of the hopper is really nicely done. They've captured the distinctive look of the prototypes really well. And as I said before, these ribs on here are really nicely done. They are separately applied detail pieces, and it means that Accurascale have been able to get a really, really good close finish in keeping with the prototype. But there's no actual gaps underneath. To look at them, you wouldn't realise that they were separately applied pieces because they do fit ever so snugly in there. So we don't get any of these unsightly lines at the edge where different pieces are fitted together. So that's really, really nice. On the underside, we're fitted with metal wheels, and they've got quite a weight to them, so this does run pretty nice. They're prototypical with their 3 discs. The brake shoes, interestingly enough, seem to be ever so slightly outside of the wheel treads. It's not obvious when this wagon is running, but you can see there, they just seem to be a little bit wider than the wheel treads. And I'm not entirely sure why that might be. It may be that there's a compromise with O gauge, and for anybody who's running something like scale 7, I'm not massively familiar with the ultra fine scale versions of O gauge, but it may be a bit like P4 and EM, that they run on an ever so slightly different gauge. So that would mean that there is a bit of space to pull these wheels out if that is the case. The couplings on these, we've got 3 link couplings, and they are sprung loaded. So you can see there that the actual drawbar springs in and out, and these are perfectly usable out of the box as working couplings. And that sprung drawbar is very prototypical, and it means that when you have a long train of these and the locomotive moves away, the wagons have a little bit of give in them because of that sprung coupling, so they'll actually look more prototypical when running in the train. When we look down inside the hopper, again we've got these kind of gussets all where they should be, and we've got this really quite nice representation of the bottom hopper unloading chutes as well. So whether this wagon is full or empty, it really does look the part. You could argue that this is probably a pretty mundane workaday wagon, but Accurascale have given an attention to detail that makes this the Rolls-Royce of O-gauge wagons. Overall, I am really impressed by these. It's the first Accurascale O-gauge wagon that I've had the joy of looking at, and I am not disappointed. So, to the scores. First up, finish. Well, it hasn't really put too much of a foot wrong. The actual demarcation between the black and the grey is sharp, just as you would expect on a wagon like this. It does perhaps look a little odd to be clean, and that is probably testament to how much the prototypes very quickly became weathered and worn and rusty, and I think that actually a factory weathered version of this might not be such a bad idea. So for finish, I'm going to give it a 9.1 out of 10. So to functionality, and one of the things that really struck me with this is some of the attention to detail below the sole bar. So for example, that independent 4-wheel sprung suspension, that is really nicely done. And so is the posable brake lever too. I just really like the attention to detail that's gone into that makes this an incredibly smooth running wagon. So in terms of functionality, this is probably the best designed wagon I've seen so far this year, and I can't really fault anything on it. So for functionality, I'm going to give it 10 out of 10. Ease of use, well, Accurascale have covered the early, the late, and also the NCB internal user version. So their range covers pretty much anything that you could choose to model, and it makes it the perfect accompaniment to a lot of the locomotives that are coming through in NCB livery, but also BR liveried ones too. It was a long-lasting wagon, and Accurascale have catered for all of its lifespan. So I'm going to give this a 9.8 out of 10. Aesthetics. Well, they've captured the look of the prototype really, really well. The actual chassis and below the sole bar is particularly exquisite, and I just love the attention to detail. You might say, well, I'm never going to see a lot of this internal detail in the hopper unloading mechanism, but I guess it just shows how much love has gone into the design and creation of this model, that some of the things that you aren't necessarily going to see are still there and still amazingly accurate. So I'm going to give this a 9.9. For me, the only real detraction was probably that it would have been better to be presented with some degree of maybe tampo printed rust patches and an overall dusting of weathering. That said, a lot of people like to do their own weathering, so it does give the perfect starting canvas for those who want to go that route. Value for money. Well, O gauge is not as expensive as it used to be. These models, well, they are quite expensive when you compare them to the 00 version, but I have to say you get a lot of model for your money. And actually in O gauge, what I found is you don't need anywhere near the size of fleet that you would with a 00 gauge layout. Just a few wagons and a couple of locomotives has been more than enough to actually feel like I'm overpopulating my O gauge layout. So I think it's money well spent, and when you compare it with prices for buying a kit, building that kit, and then painting and finishing it, to get anywhere near this standard, you would be spending 3, 4, or even 5 times the money. So value for money, I'm going to give this a 9.5 out of 10. So overall, a really, really good strong showing at 48.3 out of 50. There's very little to detract from this wagon. So if you model the BR period or NCB, then this wagon is an absolute must for you. I don't particularly model any particular period in O gauge, but I have to say, this wagon really is one of the best that I've seen. So I'd like to extend a big thanks to Accurascale for giving me the opportunity to review this O-scale wagon. Well, I hope that's been informative to you. Don't forget to like this video and share it too, and also subscribe to the channel. You'll be the first to know about new videos as and when they go up. And if you really like today's product and want to get one of these for yourself, then we've got a link down below which takes you straight to, in this instance, Rails of Sheffield, to be able to purchase your own version for your collection. But you take really good care of yourself. And this is me, Jenny Kirk, saying thanks for watching. Catch you later. Today's video is sponsored by Train-O-Matic, makers of DCC decoders designed to be fully compatible with every manufacturer's locomotive. Visit train-o-matic.com to browse the full range and see what they've got suitable for you. I'd like to send out a huge thanks to everybody who supports me on Patreon, but a special thanks go out to Anthony Kidson, Michael Churchwood, Alec Ralph, Anthony Hunt, William Wade, Wayne Johns, Offshore Allen, oorail.co.uk, Tepic, Michael Lockie, and Helen Sink. Thank you. Without you guys, I couldn't do this.